You are not here by accident. Something brought you to this video, and I want to suggest that the something which brought you here is the same something we are about to discuss. A presence in your life that has been insisting on your attention for longer than you can remember. That you have been calling a problem. That you have been trying, with everything you have, to get rid of. What if you have been wrong about what it is? Not wrong about the fact that it is difficult, not wrong about the fact that it disrupts your life, your relationships, your sleep, your capacity to function the way you want to function. All of that is real. All of that matters. But wrong about its nature, wrong about what it fundamentally is. Because James Hillman, one of the most radical and honest psychologists of the 20th century, spent his entire career arguing something that modern medicine, modern psychiatry, and even most modern psychology has refused to accept. Your symptom is not a malfunction. It is not an error in your system. It is not evidence that something broke, that something went wrong in your childhood or your neurology or your life. Your symptom is a god in disguise, and the reason you cannot get rid of it is not because you have not tried hard enough. It is because you have been trying to silence something that came here to be heard. Most people, when they encounter a symptom, when the anxiety arrives, when the depression settles in, when the fear takes up residence in the body and refuses to leave, do one of two things. They fight it. They deploy every available resource against it. Medication, cognitive reframing, breath work, exercise, therapy, meditation, journaling, willpower. The full arsenal of modern self-improvement aimed at a single target. Make this stop. Or they surrender to it in a different way. They let it become their identity. They say, I am an anxious person. I am someone who struggles with depression. This is just who I am. And in that surrender, the symptom becomes a ceiling, the limit of what is possible for them. Both responses share an assumption, the assumption that the symptom is the enemy, that the goal, whether through fighting or through accommodation, is ultimately to diminish it, to make it smaller, to make it matter less. Hillman looked at this and said, You have made a fundamental category error. You are treating a message as a malfunction. You are trying to silence a voice that came here to say something you have not yet been willing to hear. And the more you fight it, the louder it gets. And the more you accommodate it as your permanent identity, the more territory it claims in your life. The third option, the one that almost no one takes because it is the most demanding of all, is to stop and ask, what is this? Not how do I fix this? Not how do I manage this? What is this? What kind of thing is this? What does it want? What world did it come from? What would it look like to actually meet it, rather than to spend another decade in a war you have already spent a decade losing? Let me tell you about the ancient world for a moment. Because Hillman's psychology is not modern at all. It is, in fact, a recovery of something very old that modernity has almost entirely destroyed. The ancient Greeks did not have our concept of mental illness. They did not have our concept of the symptom as a biological malfunction to be corrected. What they had instead was a cosmology, a populated universe, in which multiple divine forces were real, were present, were active in human life, and demanded their portion of attention and honor. When a person was consumed by rage, the Greeks saw Ares. When someone was seized by an obsessive, destructive love, they saw Aphrodite. When a person could not stop moving, could not settle, kept crossing thresholds and breaking rules, and living in the uncomfortable space between worlds, they saw Hermes. These were not metaphors. They were a genuine way of understanding what happens when a force larger than the individual ego takes over a human life. Hillman did not ask us to literally believe in the Olympian gods. He asked us to recover something the Greek imagination understood that ours has lost. that the forces moving through a human being are not always personal. They are not always reducible to your history, your neurology, your family of origin, your unprocessed childhood wounds. Sometimes, often, what is moving through you is archetypal. It is ancient. It has moved through other human beings across centuries. It belongs to a pattern larger than your biography, and it will not be healed by approaches that treat it as if it were only personal, only biological, only about you. The symptom is the place where the archetypal enters your life, and the God behind the symptom is not there to harm you. It is there because it needs something from you that you have been withholding. Now, let me be specific, because this can sound beautiful in the abstract and useless in the particular, and what Hillman offers is not beautiful abstraction. It is a genuinely different way of sitting with the most difficult experiences of your life. Take anxiety. Modern treatment says, anxiety is a dysregulation of the nervous system, a pattern of threat detection that has become overactive, a cognitive distortion that catastrophizes the future, all of which may be true at one level of description. And from that description flows a treatment. Regulate the nervous system, correct the cognitive distortion, reduce the threat response to manageable levels. Hillman asks a different set of questions. He asks, which God is anxiety? What kind of intelligence moves through it? What does it know? And the answer he finds is something like this. Anxiety is the experience of the future rushing into the present before the ego is ready to receive it. It is a state of radical openness to what has not yet happened. It is, at its core, a form of attention, painful, unwanted, compulsive attention, to the edges of the known, the places where what is familiar gives way to what is not yet. Hermes is there, the god of thresholds, the god of transitions, the god who moves between worlds and makes communication possible across every boundary, the god who cannot be confined to any settled territory because his nature is movement, crossing the fertile and terrifying space between. When anxiety is understood this way, the question changes. The question is no longer, how do I make this stop? The question is, what threshold am I being asked to cross that I have been refusing to cross? What communication is trying to come through that I have been blocking? What movement is my life requiring of me that my ego finds intolerable? That is a completely different conversation, and it leads somewhere that fighting the anxiety never could. Take depression. The modern treatment, chemical imbalance, disrupted circadian rhythms, learned helplessness, patterns of negative cognition to be corrected. Reduce the symptoms, return the person to functional baseline, help them re-engage with life, all of which has its place. I am not dismissing the reality of biological depression or the genuine help that treatment offers. But Hillman asks, what God is in the depression? And what he finds is Saturn, the ancient god of deep time, slow time, the long view, the stone weight of what endures, the god who rules over winter and over the kind of knowledge that can only be gained in darkness, the god who is the enemy of surfaces, of speed, of the quick fix, of the relentless insistence on functioning and productivity and getting on with things. When Saturn moves through a human life as depression, he is pulling the person downward, away from the horizontal rush of ordinary life, into depth, into slowness, into the kind of interior stillness that the culture calls illness because it cannot tolerate what it produces. That descent is not comfortable, it is not pleasant, it does not feel like healing from the inside, but something is happening in it that cannot happen any other way. A kind of knowing, a kind of stripping away, a kind of contact with the deeper substrate of the self that the busy, functioning, optimized life never permits. The question depression asks is not, how do I return to normal? The question is, what in my life needs the long, slow, Saturnian treatment? What have I been running past that needs to be sat with? What depth has been calling me that I have been refusing in favor of function? Take fear, not the fear of a specific present threat, the fear that lives in the body without an object, the fear that wakes you at 3 in the morning with no name attached to it, the fear that has been there, in one form or another, since childhood. Hillman would ask, what is this fear protecting? Not in the therapeutic sense of what defense mechanism is this, but literally, materially, what sacred territory does this fear stand guard over? Because fear, in the archetypal imagination, is always at a threshold. It is always at the entrance to something. It is the God's way of marking the boundary between the ordinary world and the world that requires more of you than the ordinary world does. The fear you cannot explain is not pathology. It is an invitation to pay attention to where in your life you are standing at a threshold you have not yet had the courage to cross. And the question is not how to eliminate the fear, but what is on the other side of it that your soul is asking you to move toward. Now, here is what this means practically, not abstractly, practically. When the symptom arrives, when the anxiety rises, when the depression settles, when the fear takes hold, the first practice is the simplest and the hardest. Stop fighting it for long enough to look at it, not to indulge it, not to act from it, not to let it make your decisions, but to actually look at it, the way you would look at something that arrived unexpectedly and might have something important to say. Ask it, what are you? Not in the clinical sense, in the mythic sense. What kind of presence is this? Does it have an image, a color, a weight, a direction? Does it feel ancient, like something that has moved through human beings forever? Or does it feel personal, recent, biographical? Ask it, what do you need from me that I have not yet been willing to give? Not what do you want me to do? What do you need from me? Attention, perhaps. Recognition. The acknowledgement that you are real, that you belong here, that you are not simply a malfunction to be corrected, but a presence with its own intelligence and its own demands. Ask it, what would it look like if I stopped spending all my energy fighting you and started spending some of it listening to you? This is not surrender to the symptom. This is something more precise and more demanding than surrender. It is the willingness to engage with what is actually present in your life rather than with the story about what should not be present in your life. And when you do this, when you genuinely do this, even once, even imperfectly, something shifts. Not the symptom itself, necessarily, not immediately, but your relationship to it, the quality of your experience of it, the meaning it carries. It stops being pure suffering and starts being difficult knowledge. It stops being something that is happening to you and starts being something that is moving through you. And that shift, from victim of the symptom to vessel for what the symptom carries, is the beginning of what Hillman called soul-making. There will be people in your life who do not understand why you are no longer simply trying to get better. Who will offer you the language of recovery and healing and return to function? Who will be genuinely confused by your refusal to treat your difficulty as only a problem? Let them be confused, because the person who has learned to ask what God is in this has access to a kind of depth that the person who only fights their symptoms never reaches. Not because suffering is noble, not because difficulty is inherently meaningful, but because inside every genuine difficulty, every anxiety that will not quit, every depression that will not lift, every fear that lives in the body without an object, there is something real trying to get your attention. Something that has been trying to get your attention, perhaps, for years. Saying no to the reflexive war against your own depths is not weakness. It is not self-indulgence. It is the most serious act of self-respect available to you. It is the beginning of a relationship with your own inner life that is honest enough to actually change something. Set aside 1 hour today, your sacred hour. Bring one symptom, the one you have been fighting the longest. Sit with it, not to analyze it, not to trace it back to its origin, not to construct a treatment plan. Simply ask it the questions I have given you. What are you? What do you need from me? What would it look like if I stopped fighting you and started listening? Write down what comes, not what you think should come, what actually comes. The stranger the better, the more mythic the better. Let it surprise you. That is the beginning of meeting the God behind your symptom. That is the beginning of a life that is large enough to contain what you actually are. Subscribe to this community, not for the psychology, for the companionship of others who are asking the same questions, sitting with the same gods, learning the same difficult and necessary art of listening to what they have been taught to silence. The gods have been waiting, not for you to be healed of them, for you to finally let them speak.